If you're 62 years old with $1.4 million saved and you're wondering if that's enough to retire now and spend $10K a month, then this video is for you. One of our clients came to us with exactly that question. They had saved diligently, they had diversified across accounts, and even met with a financial planner, but no one, not the online calculators they used, their Monte Carlo software, or even their financial planner at Fidelity, would give them a straight answer about what they could spend if they wanted to retire tomorrow. And my name is Amzalag. I'm a certified financial planner and I'm the owner of Peak Financial Planning. And after years of being a financial planner, we have developed specific frameworks to evaluate whether someone's savings can realistically support their retirement lifestyle goals. And that's exactly why I'm making this video today, to show you how to answer the question of whether $1.4 million at age 62 is enough to support a $10,000 monthly retirement budget. And so in today's video, I'm going to show you three things. First, what investment return would this couple need to seek in order to achieve their $10,000 dream budget? Second, when should this couple claim Social Security to maximize their retirement income? And third, would Roth conversions help or hurt their ability to meet their $10,000 a month dream budget? Meet Mark and Lisa. Mark is 62 and Lisa is 60, and they live in Nevada. They have about $1.4 million in retirement savings. They've lived frugally all their lives, but now they are dreaming of finally enjoying their money by upgrading their lifestyle and spending $10K a month in retirement. Now, Mark and Lisa are frustrated because despite their large nest egg, they tell me that they feel like they can't get an honest answer to the question of whether they can actually afford to live on $10K a month or whether that would be a retirement ending mistake. And they tell me that they need clarity on whether they can safely increase their spending now while still ensuring that their money will last. Mark and Lisa have been living below what they can actually afford because every purchase causes them anxiety about jeopardizing their ability to retire comfortably at 62. So let's take a look at how we can help them determine whether and under what conditions they could spend $10K a month and still retire at 62. So here are Mark and Lisa, ages 62 and 60. Mark has a pre-tax IRA worth about $1.05 million. Lisa has a Roth IRA worth $220,000, and they have a joint brokerage account that's worth about $130,000. So altogether, they have a total portfolio of about $1.4 million. Now, they also have a paid-off home that's worth about $700,000 in Nevada. Now, their only sources of guaranteed income in retirement are going to be Social Security. At 67 or full retirement age for Mark, he will receive $29.60 a month, and at the same age, Lisa will receive $24.30 a month. And they said that their Fidelity planner and their Monte Carlo plan has told them to file Social Security at age 70, but they don't actually know why that's the best option. And in a couple minutes, I'm going to show you how on the screen, how we help them understand when and how to make their Social Security claiming decision. And I think you're going to be quite surprised by the answer. But first, let's take a look at a couple more details of the Income Lab's risk-based modern guardrails plan that we're building for them. The first thing that we explained to Mark and Lisa is that modern guardrails, unlike Monte Carlo software, will give them a direct and specific answer to the question, how much can I spend? In Income Labs, this is called spending capacity or the retirement paycheck, and you can see that right here on the screen. Now, the trick here is that we need to get the data entry just right, or we will risk getting a spending capacity that causes all sorts of downstream problems later in retirement. So there are three primary inputs that are going to determine Income Lab's recommended spending capacity. The primary input is going to be Mark and Lisa's willingness to make a spending adjustment at some point in their retirement. And you can see that here, that we tell Mark and Lisa that we're going to use our default setting, which is telling the software that Mark and Lisa would be comfortable with a 30% likelihood of a small 5% spending adjustment at some point in their retirement. The second important detail in arriving at an accurate spending capacity is how we include lumpy spending in the plan. Lumpy spending are one-time or infrequent expenses that we need to include, things like replacing a car or end-of-life care or pre-Medicare health insurance premiums. I'm going to show you that here. And we tell Mark and Lisa that while we don't need to know the exact dollar amount of what those things might cost, we do need to include an estimate. Otherwise, Income Labs or any financial planning software is going to assume that you won't spend on those things, which will result in what we call phantom spending capacity. Now, phantom spending capacity results in inappropriately high spending recommendations that will destroy your retirement plan, right? Which is why it's so important to build these plans correctly. So for Mark and Lisa, because they would be retiring at 62, we have included a $2,000 a month budget for pre-Medicare health insurance right here through age 65. We've also included a $35,000 budget for a car replacement every 10 years that adjusts with inflation, and you can see that here. And then finally, we've included 24 months of end-of-life care worth $22,000 a month per partner. And that's going to begin 2 years before the end of their plan, and you can see that here. All right. Mark and Lisa had admitted that their $10,000 a month dream budget hadn't really taken those things into account, and so they were glad that we were able to supply those details. Now, the third critical detail in determining Mark and Lisa's spending capacity is their assumed rate of growth on their portfolio. And we explained that for their baseline plan, regardless of how they're actually invested currently, we're going to assume that they are invested in a standard 60-40 retirement portfolio, which, as you can see here on the screen, is expected to yield a roughly 4.8% rate of return after inflation. So that's about 7% a year when you include inflation. And to be clear, we explained to Mark and Lisa that this wasn't necessarily a recommendation, but we need to start with the baseline so that we can reverse engineer what rate of return on their investments would be required in order to achieve their $10,000 dream budget. And so now, with all the data entered correctly, let's find out whether Mark and Lisa can support their $10K a month dream budget. First, we're going to look at the projections of their first 4 years of retirement expenses and compare that to Income Lab's recommended spending capacity. For that, we're going to use LifeHub here, and you can see that in this scenario, in year 1 of retirement, which is 2026 for them, they would have a spending capacity of $123,000 against an expected amount of expenses of $120,000. So things look good. But in years 2, 3, and 4, which you can now see, that relationship inverts. Their expenses suddenly overtake their approved spending capacity. What's the reason? Taxes, right? Somewhere in year 2 of retirement, they're going to end up depleting their joint brokerage account and begin dipping into pre-tax accounts, causing a $10,000 bump in their expenses. And I explained to Mark and Lisa that if they wanted to have $10K a month to spend on themselves and their lives, they actually need more income than that to account for taxes. And so right off the bat here, it looks like this first scenario would not satisfy their $10K per month dream budget. And so the obvious question here is there a scenario that would support that dream budget? Now, the answer is yes, but the change that enables that dream budget is probably not what you'd think. And so I asked Mark and Lisa what they thought might do the trick. And to their credit, they repeated back to me all the same answers that the financial services industry teaches you to look at. They said, well, if taxes are the problem causing our expenses to spike, why don't we do Roth conversions to reduce our lifetime tax bill? Mark and Lisa said, well, what about claiming Social Security at 70 instead of what you have in the software right now, which is 67, so that we have an increased monthly benefit? Mark and Lisa also said, well, we don't know that we're comfortable with it, but what if we took on more investment risk and tried for a higher portfolio growth to see if that would balance the scales? So I built all 3 of those scenarios here in Income Labs, right? This next scenario right here shows Mark and Lisa claiming Social Security at age 70. Now, you're going to see once this loads that it presents the same problem in years 2 through 4 of retirement. Let me show you. You can see here in year 2, they balance the budget, but in years 3, 4, right here, in year 1, it balances the budget, but in years 2, 3, and 4, they have a negative relationship between suggested spending and their actual expenses. Now, this next scenario that I'm toggling here shows Mark and Lisa claiming Social Security at 70 and doing Roth conversions. So they're layering on both things. And what you're going to see in a second once this loads is that while the spending capacity is going to go up, so let's go to year 3 of retirement, you can see the spending capacity goes up to $142K. That's not actually accurate because that extra income capacity Income Labs is recommending would actually go towards the Roth conversion, right? It would not be personal spending for Mark and Lisa. And you can see that here where it says savings and transfers of $15,900 applied towards Roth conversions. And so they would have a recommended income of $142,000 in this scenario, of which $16,000 would be moved to their Roth account and almost $12,000 would go towards taxes. And so this scenario doesn't work either, right? Now let's go to a fourth and final scenario. And in this fourth and final scenario, we move way out on the risk curve for their investments. We suggest, or we model changing their portfolio to a 75-25 portfolio compared to a 60-40. And this is going to assume a rate of growth, which we go over here, we can find out what the estimated rate of growth would be of 6.3% after inflation. So about 8.5% when you include inflation. And in this scenario, again, if we go back to LifeHub and we look at their cash flows, you're going to see that here, again, it doesn't close the gaps in years 2, 3, and 4. So needless to say, Mark and Lisa are a bit discouraged at that point after I've shown them this. But there's a scenario that works. And it's a scenario that actually decreases risk in the plan. It results in a smoother retirement income experience, and it enables their $10,000 a month dream budget. That scenario is claiming Social Security earlier rather than later. Now, I remember delivering this information to Mark and Lisa, and their jaws literally dropped. And once they had collected themselves, they basically said to me, Eric, everyone recommends claiming Social Security later, and everyone recommends Roth conversions. But you're telling us that the change to make to enable our dream retirement is actually none of those things, but instead simply to claim Social Security earlier, the complete opposite of what we've been told. And I said, let's just take a look at the two scenarios that include this, right? So the first scenario here is going to be Mark and Lisa claiming Social Security at 65 rather than 67 and sticking with their 60-40 portfolio. And in years 2 through 4 of retirement, you're going to see here that they're basically break even. In some years they're plus, in some years they're break even, in some years they're down by $1,000, which is relatively meaningless in the scope of this plan. In the years where there were issues, there's no issue any longer. Now, the thing here is that checking cash flow scenarios and income labs is not actually enough to determine if a scenario is entirely viable. It's just the minimum that would be required. And so for those scenarios that I've shown so far, I haven't actually gone to look at Mark and Lisa's guardrails. But since this is the first scenario that passes the first test, we're going to go see if they would pass the second test in this scenario, which is what the depth of their lower guardrail would be. So for that, we're going to go over here to the guardrail screen. And you can see on the screen here that in this scenario, they would have a lower guardrail of 23%, meaning that they would not have to make a spending change in retirement until their portfolio had declined by more than 23%. And that puts them right on the cusp of our safe recommendation. At Peak Financial Planning, we like to see a lower guardrail of 24%. But 23% puts them right in the margin of error where I'd say this would actually be a viable plan. But there's actually a better scenario than this. And again, it's one that surprised Mark and Lisa because, again, it goes against the mainstream narrative. And the final scenario here is going to include Mark and Lisa claiming Social Security at 65, but also moving to a 75-25 portfolio. So moving their investment portfolio out along the risk curve. And this is going to give them just slightly better cash flows, but more importantly, it's going to give them significantly better guardrail depth. And so if we go here and we look at years 2 to 4, you can see now they're break even in year 2. They're just about break even in year 3. They're break even in year 4. They're plus in they're going to be break even in year 5 and plus after that. But more importantly, as I said, if we go to their guardrails in the riskier portfolio, we can see that they go from a 23% lower guardrail to a 27% lower guardrail. And so I explained to Mark and Lisa that by claiming Social Security earlier, they reduce the withdrawals and reliance on their portfolio for a couple years while still early in their retirement. And this increases their spending capacity. But this also allows them to take on a bit more risk in their portfolio, which will increase their lower guardrail and provide them a hedge against living too long. In financial plans and in retirement planning in general, the longer you live, the better the odds are that investing with a higher risk level and trying to achieve a higher rate of return will pay off, and that will provide some longevity insurance. However, it's risky to increase a portfolio risk level too early in retirement if you don't have non-portfolio income sources you can rely on. And so in the scenario where you don't have non-portfolio income sources, you could find yourself triggering lower guardrails early in retirement and then maybe never recovering. But in this scenario, they would claim Social Security a little earlier, and that would give them that triaging effect that would enable a higher risk level in their portfolio. Now, for all of our benefits, right? Mark, Lisa, and all of you watching the video, the key takeaway here is this. Financial planning software doesn't always optimize for what the human in front of the screen actually wants. And financial services professionals are not taught to optimize for what the retiree wants. Software optimizes for what's best by the numbers, and financial services professionals optimize for what's best for their business. And what's best by the numbers or for the business is not always what's best for the retiree. And so in Mark and Lisa's case, they wanted a plan that could deliver an age 62 retirement with a $10K a month dream budget without putting the back end of their retirement at risk. And following the conventional financial planning narrative of working longer didn't cut it. Performing Roth conversions would have just increased their expenses at the cost of their own personal spending in early retirement. And claiming Social Security at 70 would not have solved any of their problems or enabled that spending budget. And so none of those things are consistent with Mark and Lisa's stated objectives. At the end of the day, there were tons of great data points that I reviewed with Mark and Lisa in the software that showed exactly how viable these unconventional plans were. Claiming Social Security earlier and increasing portfolio risk would have actually provided a better retirement income experience in all major historic market downturns, including the Great Depression, the dot-com crisis, and the Great Financial Crisis. And Income Labs is a really cool tool. You can see all that in the tool. I'm just not going to show it in this video for time's sake. And again, claiming Social Security earlier and increasing portfolio risk would have provided more lifetime spending money across all three of those historic market downturns. And again, you can see that in Income Labs. Now, the trade-off in both of those cases would have been that Mark and Lisa would have smaller end-of-life portfolios, which for some people viewing this video may be a trade-off you're not willing to make, which is why there's no one-size-fits-all plan. But Mark and Lisa told me they were thrilled to see that they did indeed have options, and good ones at that. Options that were consistent with their values and the way they wanted to live their retirement. And so here's the lesson from Mark and Lisa's story. Retirement planning isn't about following blanket advice or chasing the perfect strategy. It's about building a plan that reflects your values, your lifestyle, and your definition of security. And for Mark and Lisa, the path forward wasn't what the calculators or conventional wisdom told them. It was the strategy that actually supported the dream budget and dream retirement that they wanted while giving them peace of mind. And so if you're watching this and wondering whether your own retirement savings can support the life that you want, then click the first link in the description below this video to watch a free webinar I've recorded that describes the 4-step system we use at Peak Financial Planning to help you craft your dream retirement. Thank you as always for your time and attention, and I'll see you in the next video.